We become trapped by it, not just that physical feeling, but also we can become trapped financially by it, right? Because very quickly you're in a house maybe that you have to work a 9 to 5 and maybe a side gig, and your partner has to work a 9 to 5 and a side gig to afford that mortgage, to afford the insurance, to pay for that furniture, to pay for the kitchen remodel, to pay for the car you upgrade every 2 years. You become, it's like I often say, the idea is we should own our stuff, not the other way around. And what often happens is we find ourselves in situations in this society where our stuff owns us. Maybe they start thinking about downsizing, and it is painful. I'm sure that it was probably emotionally painful for you and your spouse to go through that process. But also when we think about life, like, we have to let go of things. We can get really deep philosophically in this, but we're not going to live forever. Sometimes this accumulation of stuff is a way we're trying to immortalize ourselves in a way, but we have to let go of all of it. There's no U-Haul behind the hearse, right? We have to let go of it all. And I think it's actually spiritually very healthy for us to recognize that. It's all about, my definition of minimalism or simplicity is getting clear about what you want and having the guts to let go of everything else. So it's really about getting clarity on what you really want in your life, and then having the courage to let go of what's not in alignment with that. And so that's the approach that I take when I'm helping people, is I first want to know what they really want to see. What's your vision? How do you want this to look and feel? And once we're clear on that, usually we've already said no to a lot of the stuff that might be in that space or in your life.
Welcome to Catching Up to Fi, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to Fi together.
All right. Hello, guys, and welcome back to Catching Up to Fi, where we talk about money, life, and everything that tends to pile up along the way, like these books that you see behind me. Sometimes literally. And Jackie, today's guest is one I think a lot of our listeners are going to feel seen by, because we all have clutter problems.
Oh, yeah, Bill, because if you've looked around your house or your calendar or even your to-do list and you thought, how did I end up with so much of everything? This episode is for you.
Exactly. And let's be honest, a lot of us on the Fi Path are really good at achieving, optimizing, accumulating, and not always so great at stopping and pausing and asking, is this actually making my life better?
Yeah, this is why we are so excited to have Rose Lounsbury join us today. She is a writer, speaker, professional organizer, and simplicity coach. But more importantly, she is someone that has lived this herself. She started her own decluttering and simplicity journey in 2012 as a full-time working mom of triplets. And you heard that right, she's got triplets. And she wanted a better way to manage her career and her family.
Yeah, I mean, I have twins, and whenever we saw triplets going around when our kids were young, I was like, oh God, bless them. I don't know how they do this, because the diapers are exponential. It seems like it's more than 3 kids when you have diapers going on. So anyway, Rose is the author of Less, Minimalism for Real, where she shares how she decluttered more than 70% of her belongings, not to live in an empty house with 1 fork and 1 plate, but to create space for a life that actually fit who she was becoming.
Yeah, and more recently, she wrote The Achievement Addict, which honestly hit close to home for both of us, right, Bill?
Yeah, I'm type A, I'm a perfectionist, and go, go, go. And you do need to pause and declutter not only your external life, but your internal life. There's a lot of holistic stuff that goes on here. Rose has spoken at conferences like Economy, where we first met her. She's been featured on podcasts across the personal finance and intentional living space. And she helps people simplify both their physical, external spaces and their inner lives.
Yeah, and she also had a really good TEDx talk that I loved. I had to re-listen to it this week. But what we really love most about Rose's version of minimalist is that it's incredibly human. It's not about perfection, which we know we are not perfect. It's not about aesthetics. It's about figuring out what is enough. That was the topic of her economy talk. And it's like, what is enough with your stuff, your money, your time, and your energy? So we're going to talk about all of that. So not just the physical, but like the emotional and the psychological stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, we are burdened by our stuff and we are really challenged across the spectrum, and especially in the FI community, as I am now trying to decide what is enough. Is FI enough? Or do the goalposts move? What is the one more year syndrome? All of these enoughs that we're trying to define. So we're going to talk to Rose about decluttering that works, the emotional side of letting go, just like the emotional side of money and finance. This is critical. And how do achievement and accumulation get tangled together, how minimalism fits beautifully into a catching up to FI journey.
Yay, Rose. Welcome to Catching Up to FI. We're so glad to have you.
Oh my goodness, that was the most beautiful intro. Thank you both so much. I'm just so thrilled to be here with you, Jackie and Bill. So yeah, this is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I mean, Rose, if people look, I'm surrounded by books. My wife is into books. I'm into books. We have hundreds of pounds of books in our house, and it's the new year. This episode is coming out at the beginning of the year. We all want to lose weight. We all want to get fit with our finances. We all want to declutter and do spring cleaning, but we don't know where to start. Before we get into that, though, I think Jackie and I want to hear about your journey, because this kind of journey to minimalism started when you were a kid. Your money journey starts when you were a kid. Tell us about maybe the cluttered childhood life you had that led you on this journey of the decluttering path.
Thank you. It's interesting that this episode is coming out in January, and January was actually when my decluttering journey started. I wouldn't say that I came from an exceptionally cluttered childhood, but I was born in 1981, so I was raised in like the 80s and 90s, which was some decades of accumulation. A lot of capitalism was just banging on all cylinders in those decades. So we were not a wealthy family, but you could buy a lot of stuff. There was the age of Walmart and big box stores. We did not have online yet. Parents were raised by people who survived the Great Depression. And so we can talk a little bit about that later, but there's this idea of you save everything that could be useful someday. And I remember my grandma saved every cottage cheese container. She loved to sew. She saved every zipper. And when we moved her out of her house when she was older, I remember she had bags and it was all organized. So she had bags labeled large zippers and small zippers. That's the level of saving that I come from. So I come from people who are relatively frugal, who know how to save, who know how to reuse. And that's a very valuable value. And I don't want to diminish that value in any way. But I think what we have to realize is that's a value that makes a lot of sense if you are in a Great Depression, where there aren't a lot of things available to you. But if you apply that value today, where for better or worse, we have easy access to a lot of goods, it can quickly become what you're describing, Bill, where you didn't say this, but I get the sense you might feel a little burdened by some of these things, like the books. Like back in the day, how many books could a person afford? Not nearly as many today, where there's like print on demand on Amazon. So anyway, so that's a little bit of my generational background coming into this. And I think probably a lot of people can relate to that, being raised by probably frugal people who were savers, because FI people also, we are savers. We are good at saving generally. But I'll bring you up to speed, like where in my life this started to become a problem. And that was 2012. So we're talking about 13 years ago. And it was January and it was right after Christmas. And that's why I think this is really pertinent to your audience. So at that time, I was teaching middle school English. So I was a full-time working mom and I have triplets, as Jackie said. So they were 2 years old. And 2-year-olds at Christmas, we have 2 sets of out-of-state grandparents. We'd gone up to visit them for Christmas and you come back. And I remember our van was so stuffed with presents, we actually couldn't bring all the presents home from my in-laws' house. We had to leave some of them there because you got the kids and the pack and plays and the high chairs and the presents and all of that stuff. And so I remember walking into my house and just looking around, and my house is about 1,500-ish square feet. So it's not a large house by American standards. And I look around and I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, like I don't even have room for the stuff we already own. And on top of that, I'm working full time. So I'm a teacher. So I have to be at work at 7 in the morning. I get home about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when my childcare person is off duty. So then I go from teaching middle school kids all day to taking care of 3 2-year-olds in the evening. And then that's a lot of work, as anyone who's ever seen children knows. By the time you get them in bed, you've got maybe an hour before you've got to get yourself to bed to get up the next day. And I found during that hour, all I was doing was taking care of my stuff, picking up the toys and the shoes and the sippy cups and moving the piles of paper around, just trying to get the house reset so that I could drop in bed exhausted. And then I would get up the next day and do it all over again. So it was this pattern of serve your students, serve your family, serve your stuff. And rinse and repeat every single day. And that was really exhausting. So that's why coming back from that Christmas and you're walking in the house and you're like, oh my gosh, like I already am barely making it, right, as is with this stuff. And now I've got more new stuff that I've got to find places for. And I, as the mom, unfortunately, this also gender roles come into play here. Typically, women are the ones that take on the burden of tending the things in the home. And so I'm like, I don't have any room in my life for these new things. And it was after Christmas, a couple weeks after Christmas, I was having lunch with a friend and I was complaining to her about Christmas and just like, gosh, they buy so much stuff for the kids and I don't have room for the current stuff. And I was like, I think maybe we should just buy a bigger house. That at the time was what I thought was the answer. Let's go bigger so I have more closets, I have more attic, I have more basement to stuff the stuff in. And my friend looked at me and she said these words that absolutely changed the course of my life. She said, you could do that, or you could become a minimalist. And I had never heard that word applied to a lifestyle. I thought of it as like minimalist art and that kind of aesthetic. And so I was really intrigued by it. And so she recommended a couple blogs. I went home, I started reading these blogs and these books. And this is even pre-Marie Kondo with her life-changing magic of tidying up, which was a thing. It was pre the minimalist guys. So there were like Leo Babauta was out there talking about this. There were a couple other people out there on the blogosphere talking about this. And I started reading these things and I'm like, oh my gosh, the answer is not have more space. The answer is not organize it better. The answer is get rid of the stuff you don't need. And it was so simple. And I couldn't believe I'd never thought of it. But this ties into like how I was raised, right? I was raised to, if it's useful, if it's still usable, you hold on to it because you might need it someday. And again, that is not a bad value. But what it can result in is a house and a life, more importantly, a life that feels absolutely stuffed, cluttered, and you don't have room for your own self to think, to imagine, to dream, to create, to do all the things that actually bring us a lot of joy in our life, spending time with the people we love. If you're picking up socks and shoes and cleaning out the cupboards all the time, you're not spending time with your family or your pets or your friends or the people you care about. So anyway, I come home from that lunch, I start reading about this, and over the next 8 months in my life, I just start letting go of stuff, like in crazy, almost like frenzied fashion. I'm just like, we don't need this. We don't need that. And the story that I often tell, and Jackie, if you watch the TEDx talk, you'll have seen this one. My TEDx talk is called How Many Towels Do You Need? And so really that was where it started. It was the January of that year. So this would have been 2012, January of that year. I open up the towel cupboard and I'm like, how many towels do we really need? We've got all the towels. All of us can picture our towels at home. So you got them stacked high, right? And so I'm like, but how many do we need? And I was like, in my mind, I was like 2 per person because we're a 1 towel at a time family. We don't do a hair towel and a body towel. It's 1 towel at a time. And then you got 1 for the spare, 1's being washed, 1's in the cupboard. I'm like, we've got 5 people in this house. We don't need more than 10 towels. And so I remember though, it felt so weird because there were way more than 10 in the cupboard. And when you got down to 10, it looked very bare to me at the time. And so I asked my husband, is it okay if we have just 10 towels? Are you okay with that? And he's, yeah, fine, sure. I don't care. And so we went down to 10 towels. And that's really about the number of towels we still have today. And my kids are 16 now. So what that shows me, and this is 13 years later, is that we can live with a lot less than we think we can. And we can definitely live with a lot less than society tells us we should. And those lessons, which started with the towels, I applied to everything else. How many dishes do we need? How many shoes do I need? How many toys do my kids need? And when you start looking at things through the lens of need versus want versus can afford versus have space for, because those are the things we have. I have the space, I can afford it, I want it. That's the consumer society that we live in. And usually the answer to those things is yes. But how many do I need? It's a very different question. And if you apply that question to the things in your life, you'll find that it not only like decreases some of that physical stress, cluttered look, but what's the more important thing is it releases like this emotional stress that a lot of times I don't think we even realize we're holding until we let go of some of that stuff. And I started eventually years later after I did this in my own house, I started a business helping people do this in their own homes. And I'll tell you, I went to a lot of homes. I went to 1-bedroom apartments. I went to mansions with swimming pools and wine cellars bigger than my living room. And every single home I went to, when I left, the number one thing people said was, oh my goodness, I feel so much better.
Wow.
It was all about the feeling, because what we don't realize is that when we're living in cluttered environments, it's not actually the clutter itself that's the problem. It's how that clutter makes us feel. And when you let go of it, it's almost like you didn't realize you were carrying a 30-pound backpack and you take it off and you're like, wow, man, I can move around now. I feel good. And that is really the power of doing this. So anyway, I did it in my own life. I started a blog about it because it was the early 2000s-ish, 2010s. Everybody was starting to blog. So I started blogging about it. That led to a business, which I still run to this day. So that's the journey. That's the story.
So, Rose, it sounds like the emotional and the psychological part has to come first, just like when you're deciding you're going to lose weight or something like that. You have to mentally be there. And it's just interesting how every client, no matter how much they had or how little they had, it was always that they feel better. So obviously there's a time of transformation. So for you, about how long did it take? And like, you've got a family of 5. And so you have to include them. The kids were little when you were starting this transformation. About how long did it take to get to that spot? Because you're having to sell stuff, you're having to like organize, and it's almost like a big project to get to that place.
Yeah, what I found is that, and this is why I think this is such an approachable thing to do, because you could create little pockets of freedom and space in your life without having to even go through your whole house. If you think of just the towels, for example, what I found is after I decluttered the towels, I would go over to the towel cupboard when I didn't have to, and I'd just open it up and I'd look at it and I'd be like, and I'd feel really good. And so that's what I tell people is you don't, because going through your whole house is a daunting task. I know some of your listeners are, maybe their kids are grown out of the house. They're in a house that maybe they raised 3-4 kids in. Now it's just them or the 2 of them. And they're like, oh my gosh, maybe your back's hurting, and looking around at that house thinking, how am I going to go through all of this is very overwhelming. But realize that it's not necessarily about even going through the whole house. It's about where can I create in this house, in this space, a little pocket of joy or simplicity or space. So maybe that's just your utensil drawer in the kitchen. Maybe that's just your medicine cabinet. Maybe it's just a junk drawer in the hallway. Maybe it's just your shoes. Maybe it's just your sock drawer. I find that people do better with this when they start with a really small, achievable step. And you get that little rush of happiness from that. You feel that freedom in that space from just that one little thing you've created. And it's that creates the momentum to do the next step. And I always tell people too, the best place to start would be a place that's not emotional, because we talked about the emotions a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little more. But a lot of times when people look at the whole house, they immediately in their mind go to what would be the biggest emotional minefield that they have. And usually that is memorabilia from somebody maybe who passed away, something that they've inherited. And opening up those boxes, first of all, you will probably never open them up because it's too emotionally taxing to do it. If you do try to open them up, you're going to just be slammed because it's really hard to go through that kind of stuff. That's why in retrospect, I understand why the towels were where I started. I didn't consciously think about this, but towels are not emotional. You don't remember every time you dried your hands lovingly. It's not like photographs or things from your kid's babyhood. So starting somewhere where you can experience some of that success in an area of your home that is not laden with memories is really helpful. So that's why I say the bathroom is the place usually, because we don't tend to keep memorabilia in the bathroom. we do tend to, even the kitchen will have some of that. Often we have dishes and things from people that were passed down to us. Definitely when we get into papers and photographs, we're going to find it. But a non-emotional space is the place to begin, and start small, and then let that momentum propel you forward. And eventually you'll have built up the muscles to do some of that harder stuff. But you do not want to start with those things.
What you talk about sounds a lot like money to our
Yeah.
low starters. I mean, when you talk about the house and the clutter, it's kind of like those of us like me that were all cluttered with our money and didn't know where to start and needed some structure. And it's like that old saying of how do you eat the elephant in the room? One bite at a time. And you started with towels, you started with the bathroom. I think this problem in our society starts with the boxes in which we live. Because given Brownian motion, no matter how small or big the house you live in, you will fill it up. It is going to get filled up. Empty space is like a vacuum and it bothers us. Then what happens in our society is, okay, it overflows into the garage. Then you can't park in the garage anymore. And then it overflows into the storage container, which is a booming business and a great place to invest in the US because people's stuff just overflows everywhere and we never tackle it. We never get a handle on it. I love your decision not to upsize your house because that would upsize a lot of costs associated with it in filling up that house. We like to spend so much time organizing the stuff we have so we can fit more stuff into the space as opposed to being parsimonious, efficient, minimalistic with the space to declutter our minds. I mean, I'm looking at my desk right now. It's completely cluttered. My mind is usually as cluttered as my desk. If I organize my desk, I feel better. I can breathe. And the same was true for you with your towels. I'm thinking about my sock drawer now, and it's like, oh my God. I got to tackle this sock drawer because I love good socks. And I have more socks that I could probably wear in 6 months. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it starts with the boxes we grow in. And the late starters, which we need to talk about, this happened to us as sort of a lifestyle inflation physician, high income family. The boxes got bigger, the stuff got more, and it got to the point where we had to pull that lever to get Defy to, which is really painful, very emotional, to downsize, to declutter, to move into a smaller box. It's much easier to upsize than it is to downsize. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I guess when I was telling my story, I didn't tell that we never moved. So I'm in the same house that my kids were brought home from the hospital in. And when we bought the house, we thought of it as a starter house. Think of even just the term starter house. That is a very modern, westernized word because the idea is like the first house you move into is just for you and maybe your partner, but you're going to grow, you're going to have a family, and then you must have a bigger house. Why do we think that? We think that because there are people making money off of us thinking we need that. Because not only does buying the bigger house make somebody money, but then you got to buy the stuff to fill up the bigger house. And then guess what? In 10 years, that stuff is outdated. So you have to upgrade the kitchen so that it's modern. It's the whole idea of a consumerist society. And we are consumers, right? There's nothing wrong with buying things. Like we're all buying things and we have to because we're not going to make everything ourselves. But it's this idea that we need the next thing or that we deserve the next thing. And the thing is, as you notice, it's a bit of a trap, right? We build ourselves into this, it might be a strong word here, but if we become trapped by it, not just that physical feeling, but also we can become trapped financially by it, right? Because very quickly you're in a house maybe that you have to work a 9 to 5 and maybe a side gig, and your partner has to work a 9 to 5 and a side gig to afford that mortgage, to afford the insurance, to pay for that furniture, to pay for the kitchen remodel, to pay for the car you upgrade every 2 years. You become, it's like I often say, the idea is we should own our stuff, not the other way around. And what often happens is we find ourselves in situations in this society where our stuff owns us. We have to work for it. We have to pay for it. We have to clean it, dust it, maintain it, repair it. I mean, even if you just think about a toaster, right? We all have a toaster. That toaster, how much of your life does that toaster take? Maybe the toaster cost you $40, right? It's not just $40 because you've got to clean the toaster. You've got to maintain the toaster. You might have to move the toaster around. It takes your time. So often I'll tell people, we don't necessarily just buy things with our money. We buy them with our time. and you multiply the toaster by everything else that you own, how much of your time are you spending on those things? And when do you feel that you've spent enough? Because the freedom of decluttering is you get your time back. Because for me, and going back to my story, what I really found, and the reason that I kept doing it is because eventually that life that I had, my life didn't change in any big way. I was still working full time as a middle school teacher. I still had 3 toddlers. But what did change is at the end of the day, when I got the kids in bed at night, I had an hour to myself because I was no longer serving my stuff for an hour. And at that time of my life, an hour to myself was more precious than gold to me. And when we talk about the boxes that we live in, I think that's a really great way to put it. If you can learn to live in a smaller box, there are a lot of advantages to that, not just financially, yes, financially, but also time-wise. Because just think of it, I live in a 1,500 square foot house. If I doubled the size of my house to 3,000 square feet, which I could afford to do, I could. I choose not to. Because when I see a big house, you know what I think? Man, look at all those bathrooms you got to clean. And that's what I think. I think, how many bathrooms would I have to clean? Or like right now, I can clean my own house, or my kids are 16 and they help. They do an okay job. But if I had a bigger house, I'd have to pay somebody probably to help me clean that house, to maintain it. And there is nothing wrong with any of that if that is how you want to spend your money. That's not how I want to spend my money. I want a house that we can clean fully in less than an hour, and we can. To me, that's valuable. That's in alignment with my own values and the things that I want in my life. And I don't expect that's the same as everybody else's. But I think we start thinking of the box as not only are we going to fill it up, and that's going to be a cost financially, but what is that going to cost you in your time that you have to spend to maintain that or pay for the maintenance of that? And so that's something that maybe your listeners can think about, especially if they're in the kind of that stage where you were, where maybe they start thinking about downsizing. And it is painful. I'm sure that it was probably emotionally painful for you and your spouse to go through that process. But also when we think about life, like, we have to let go of things. We can get really deep philosophically in this, but we're not going to live forever. Sometimes this accumulation of stuff is a way we're trying to immortalize ourselves in a way, but we have to let go of all of it. There's no U-Haul behind the hearse, right? We have to let go of it all. And I think it's actually spiritually very healthy for us to recognize that. And that's why when you see these like deeply spiritual people, they're often taking a vow of poverty. The deep spiritual leaders throughout history, what were they talking about? Give to the poor. Money will never get you to enlightenment. Like that's the message across whatever faith tradition you want to come at. There is something about accumulation that I think actually can keep us spiritually from being who we are meant to be. And so we're going like deep, deep here, but I very much believe it that when we let go of things, and it is painful, and that is a real thing, but it's almost like a spiritual practice because we have to let go of everything someday. And I think it can make us less afraid of that eventual reality for all of us.
I mean, you're talking about needing, wanting, spending, costing, time, money, energy, attention. These are all things that we struggle with. There are so many costs to stuff beyond the money and the ongoing maintenance costs, the mental burden that can be alleviated by downsizing. It was huge. Yes, it was hard and painful, but it was like you could take a deeper breath. I don't have this whole area of my house that we're not using anymore that's being heated and cooled and dusted and all this stuff when my kids went off to college. And I think one of the superpowers that late starters have is to downsize early. That will escalate your savings rate. It will escalate your journey to FI. It will hold you back financially unless you minimize to an appropriate size, a just big enough house and not a too big house. And how do you feel now with 16-year-olds versus 2-year-olds living in the same 1,500 square foot house? How did you feel, but how does your family feel about it?
I've not asked them specifically. Advantages of, I just think the closeness of the family. Like right now, all of my kids are downstairs on the couch, right? Because there's one couch in the one living room playing video games together. I think there's something about when we have these really big spaces, we can spread out and interact with each other not very often. So there's something about in a smaller home, you are forced to be together. And I will admit, there's probably at least once or twice a year where I'm like, God, it would be easier to have a bigger house. I'm not going to lie, because you could have people over, you could host things more easily. You could have Christmas at your house with all the relatives. So there are times when I think, man, it would be nice to have a bigger house. But honestly, it's just funny how you said you adjust to the space that you're in. And if you think about it, if you've ever gone on a vacation and you rented an Airbnb and maybe it was like a little cute cottage or something, you adjusted to living in that space for that week or 2 weeks that you were there. You can adjust really to living in almost any size of space. You think of people living in big cities. I'm in Dayton, so we have a lot more space here, but people in New York City, they live a very minimalist lifestyle because they're in small apartments. They learn how to use their space well. They don't buy as much stuff because they just don't have the space for it. And so we're pretty adaptable to whatever amount of space we give ourselves. We will adjust to whatever it is. And my family, I think my husband and I are pretty at peace with it. And I think a lot of it is the financial benefits. We paid the house off. That was one of the things. Like, we've paid off our house, and not a lot of people in their 40s with 3 kids have a paid off home. And one of the reasons we could pay the home off is because we didn't upgrade to a bigger home. And now we're thinking about, okay, we got to send 3 kids to college or whatever they decide to do. That becomes much more doable because we're not paying for a home. Our cars are all paid off. We don't have debts. It makes a lot of other things possible. And yes, sometimes am I like, oh my gosh, if the kids would just put their backpacks away, and why are there socks everywhere? That's a reality of any time you live with other people. But yeah, I think we're doing pretty well. And it's funny, my boys, it's a 3-bedroom house. I have triplets, 2 boys and a girl. So my daughter obviously gets her own room, and the boys have to share. And of course, they complain about it. They fight about it. But you know what? It's actually probably going to do them well in life to have had to share a room with somebody growing up, because they're going to know, hopefully, when they go off to college, like how to share with someone, how your space is not just yours. You have to negotiate with the other person, and there's going to be conflict, and you're going to have to work through that. There are actually really good, I think, life lessons for children in knowing how to live in a smaller space with other people. At least that's what I tell myself.
I am so excited to announce our new partnership at Catching Up to Fi with Monarch. Monarch is a comprehensive financial tool to monitor your financial health and life. I have been using Monarch for 3 years to track my spending, net worth, budget, savings goals, and more. I am not a spreadsheet nerd, and without Monarch's robust, intuitive tools and user interface, this process would have seemed impossible. I was recently also able to seamlessly share my data with our new flat fee financial planner for a retirement readiness checkup when I turned 60. He uses Monarch with all of his clients. After our analysis, I was shocked to find out that we were financially independent 3 years before I thought we would be. You can't manage what you don't measure. Using Monarch was critical in this review and planning process, and remains important in monitoring my ongoing financial health. Thanks to Monarch, all of our podcast listeners and community members have access to a 50% discount off their first year subscription. Simply follow the link below and use the discount code CatchingUp50 at checkout. I am proud to say that my sons are the first to use the code to join the Monarch family. I encourage you to share this link and code with family and friends this holiday season who need or want to take back their money and grow their wealth. I cannot think of a better, more generous or valuable gift or resolution. Happy holidays from all of us at Catching Up to Fi.
So Rose, can we talk a little bit about terminology? Because I feel like with certain terms, there's a lot of emotion behind those terms. Yeah. So a lot of times minimalism has a negative connotation. Do you find that? Because, tell me a little bit about that. And then, I don't know, maybe some better words like For some reason, I was always holding up my hand when it came to minimalism. But when you rephrase it like decluttering, instead of downsizing, you're right sizing. This is the better fit for me and the size home that I need, and little things like that. And I wonder, as a professional, does that even matter in the way that you interact with your clients?
Yes, it does. So I started off, I was reading minimalism blogs. And so I was using the term minimalism a lot with my clients, with my book, Less Minimalism for Real. I use that term. And what I found relatively quickly was that word scared a lot of people. Because we imagine when you think of minimalism, it almost seems it can feel like deprivation, or you're imagining a room with a white couch, white walls, white carpet. Nobody's ever allowed to live there. Most people's lives don't look like minimalism. And if you walked into my house, you would probably not think, oh, minimalism, there's nothing here. We have stuff. To me, so that's why I pretty quickly shifted and started using the word simplicity instead of minimalism when I was talking to people, because I just found it was more approachable. And it's actually a little bit more accurate because it's about creating a simpler life, not getting rid of all your stuff so that you're living with the bare bones. There's this really great Simpsons episode when Marie Kondo wrote her book about, and she was the Japanese lady who said, you hold everything and you ask yourself, does it spark joy? And if it doesn't spark joy, you tell it thank you and you let it go. And it became this big sensation.
Right.
Everybody was like, does this spark joy? The Simpsons kind of spoofed it. And Lisa Simpson, basically, she gets rid of everything. And then you see her laying in her empty bedroom on the floor, and she looks up and she goes, nothing brings me joy. And so I think when we think of minimalism, we can think of that like a nothing brings me joy. So yeah, I prefer simplicity, or I'll say minimalist-minded professional organizing or decluttering, because those do seem more approachable to people. But the bottom line is, to me, it's all about, my definition of minimalism or simplicity is getting clear about what you want and having the guts to let go of everything else. So it's really about getting clarity on what you really want in your life, and then having the courage to let go of what's not in alignment with that. And so that's the approach that I take when I'm helping people, is I first want to know what they really want to see. What's your vision? How do you want this to look and feel? And once we're clear on that, usually we've already said no to a lot of the stuff that might be in that space or in your life. And yes, you are correct, Jackie, minimalism is not always the best term for people. So that's why I use it a little sparingly. And you probably, if you look back at my stuff, you'll see a switch from minimal to simplicity, because I realized it was a better term.
It comes back to teaching our kids needs and wants. If we don't teach you early as adults with all the choices and more money, everything becomes a need when it's really a want, and we get it confused. Yeah. And then it sort of balloons in our lives, where we get to the point where there is all this clutter that we can't make sense of, and it's burdensome psychologically, physically. And so it's bad for our health, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously this is coming out in January, but it's the week before Christmas right now when we're talking. And so it's interesting because my kids, because they've been raised, because I started this when they were 2, they've been raised in this lifestyle. And so when you ask them what they want for Christmas, they're just like, a Chipotle gift card. You know? Their Christmas list is very minimal, which frustrates like my mother-in-law, who wants to buy them things, and that's fine. And it gets hard to buy stuff for my kids. But then when I think about it, I'm like, this is a really good thing. My kids are generally pretty satisfied with not a lot of stuff. They don't make a Christmas list that's 25 things long. They have to think hard about what kinds of things they would want. And part of that is they're raised in a middle-class household where all of their needs are met, right? Like their needs are met. So they're very blessed in that way. But they've not, I think, because, and it must be how we've raised them, like they don't have that appetite for really much more than what they actually need. And I never, of course, intentionally set out to do that, but that just is the power of your example with your family, because I know that's not necessarily the case with people raised other family cultures. So yeah, it is. It rubs off on the people that you live with. And so what we tend to buy for our kids are like experience gifts. We do get them a few things, but I like to do experience gifts with them, which our research will show you that's way more meaningful. we remember the money we spent on experiences, we have more positive associations with that years later than the money we spent on stuff. Like for golf example, if you bought golf clubs, 10 years later, you might think back to buying those golf clubs and you don't actually have a really high happiness response to that. But let's say you took a golf trip with your best friends and you went for a whole weekend with your best friends. 10 years later, remembering the money you spent on that, they actually will measure in your brain the dopamine or whatever, and there's a surge of it. So I think especially when we're talking about spending money, how can we spend our money in ways that is going to produce some of that longer term, meaningful, purposeful happiness in our lives? Spending it on experiences with people we love, that is the way to do it. Spending it on the stuff that we put in the closet or the storage unit, science will show you that it will not bring us happiness. And that's the big lie, of course, of consumerism, is that buy the next thing, it'll make you happy. It'll give you like a little quick hit of dopamine because we like to acquire things from our hunter-gatherer days. I found the thing, we get a little hit, but it has no longevity. So that's just another thing to think about as you are thinking about how you spend your money. Spend it, get the most bang for your buck, spend it on things that will bring you happiness longer term.
So you're sparking a memory for me, and this is for you, Bill. A few episodes ago, you said that you had purchased Apple Watches for your boys, and they've never worn them, and you put them in a drawer. And I said, I want those watches. What happened to those watches, and do I still have a chance?
Well, therein lies the conundrum, because I don't know where they are. Because
I knew it.
We're too cluttered. Rose, you woke up in 2012 when your kids were 2. And when my kids were small, with twins, Christmases were huge, birthdays were huge. The consumerism, just like you said, you couldn't fit all the presents into the van. And my wife and I look back and say, we should have, could have, would have, and might have done it differently. What do you recommend to late starters that are, say, grandparents? How do we educate that generation to sort of like not be frugal, deprived, minimalistic, but balanced, value-based spending, and in ways that bring joy for longevity, like you said, that aren't necessarily things that you have to process and declutter. Like it comes in the front door, goes out the back door to Goodwill. What strategies do you suggest for parents and grandparents to educate our youth on kind of the values you've inscribed in your kids, where it's like they don't want for anything really because their needs are met and they want time with you?
Yeah, I will tell you a story that I think will answer the question pretty well. So this was earlier on in my business. I would go to libraries and I would do talks about decluttering and simplicity, and then hopefully some people would sign up and hire me, right? And I always took questions or comments at the end of the talks. And I remember one time this woman, she was a grandmother. At the end of the talk, she raised her hand and she told me this story. She said, this Christmas, I asked my grandson what he wanted for Christmas. Grandma wants to get you something for Christmas. What do you want? And I think he was 12 years old. And he said, Grandma, what I want is a day with you and me. 12-year-old grandson. He's not asking for video games. He's not asking for stuff. He wants time with his grandma. And I share that story because I think a lot of times we underestimate how valuable our time is to our kids and our grandkids. Time is the most precious thing we have. We can't get more of it. It's absolutely the most precious thing that we have. And so I think because we've all been living in this world where we see the advertisements, the presents under the tree, the big tree with all the stuff, we think that's what kids want. It is actually not what they want. Think about your own childhood and the things that mattered to you. It was that time with those people you loved. It is for all of us. That is what matters. So as we think about giving gifts to our grandkids, to our kids, how can we give them some of that? It's the most precious thing we can give. And I do think on a practical level, if there's a culture that's been set of typical consumer gifts, if you're going to switch course here, you need to set the expectations differently. Because one of the things that I'll hear from parents and grandparents is, I don't want the kids to be disappointed on Christmas morning. I said, we're only ever disappointed in life when our expectations are not met. And that applies to relationships and Christmas morning and everything else. We have expectations, and if the expectations aren't met, we're disappointed. That's natural. So what our job is to set different expectations. So one of the things that we did when our kids were little, and I was blessed because they were so little, they didn't have different expectations, is we told them for Christmas and birthdays, you're going to get one big gift and two small gifts. And some people call this like the three wise men approach, because like the wise men, one of them brought gold and the other two brought whatever that other stuff was, which doesn't seem as important as gold. So there's like the big gift and the two small. And so when my kids would make Christmas lists, they made a list of big gifts and they made a list of small gifts. And they knew the expectation was you're going to get one big gift and then two small gifts. And whatever was big or small to them was what they considered. So funny thing, like I think they were 4 or 5 years old. And my one son on his big list, he put an electric scooter. He wanted an electric scooter, which is a pretty big gift because that's a little bit expensive. My other son on his big list, he wanted a Pokemon blanket. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is what they consider to be a big gift. And so the one got an electric scooter, the other got a Pokemon blanket, and they were happy, right? It wasn't about how much those things actually cost. Right. And so if you set expectations, so let's say you are the grandparents and you are just like, you know what? I've got grandkids who have everything they need. You can say, hey, for Christmas this year, I would like us all to go bowling as a family on Christmas Day. And we're just all going to go bowling. Maybe you'll do stockings, right? If you want to give some little gifts, but we want to go bowling, or we want to go do this, or we're going to go to a water park overnight. Or if you have more funds, maybe you take them all on a cruise. It all depends. Like experiences, it really doesn't matter how much it costs. It can be everything from like bowling as a family to like going on a cruise or everything in between. But it's good to let people know that ahead of time, especially if Christmas or whatever Hanukkah heretofore has been just a pile of presents under the tree. And that applies to birthdays or whatever. So setting that expectation ahead of time is important. And people very quickly, if you tell people this is how it's going to be, they're just like, oh, okay. Honestly, we think that kids care more about the stuff than they do. And across the board, I found like parents who downsize the amount of gifts, they're like, yeah, my kids didn't even care. Nobody even noticed. Nobody even said anything. I'm like, yeah, we think they care about it. They actually really don't care that much about it.
So we would just set the standard and set the norm because I'm a new grandmother. My daughter,
congratulations.
Thank you. My granddaughter, she is 2 months old. Okay. And I think since I came from poverty, I think I did try to give my daughter as much as possible because I'm in that makeup mode. But exactly as you've been saying, I realized that those weren't the important things. And she remembers this too. But one of the most memorable things growing up is that when we would go into her room and in anticipation of getting birthday gifts or Christmas gifts, new clothes and all of that, we first had to get rid of the old stuff to make room for the new, or else where else would she put these new things? And she remembers that.
Yeah.
And out of all the gifts that I've given her, big, small, the Barbie Corvette and all of that stuff, she remembered being happy to give stuff away because she's, oh, some other kid will like this, but I've outgrown it. And that, to me, to know that stuck with her, it really matters and is a good reminder that these are the things they remember, these experiences, which was really time with mom that we did this and helping some other kid out.
Yes. And that's a part of it that we have not really talked about is the benefit of teaching kids to be generous to others, letting go of things, or just teaching that lesson of the things that we use that are helpful to us are not always going to be helpful our whole lives. At a certain point, it's, I don't need it anymore and somebody else could use it. And the thing that we can do to help other people is we can give this thing to someone else. And I think that's the way to teach that lesson, because some criticism that minimalism or decluttering has received, which is fair, is it just a binge and purge, right? I purge all this stuff so that my closets are clean, and then I buy a bunch more stuff to fill it up. And then I purge that stuff, and then I buy more stuff. And so I think when we're teaching the lesson, it's really important to talk about it the way you talked about it with your daughter, which is we've outgrown these things. We don't need them anymore. And one of the ways, and when my kids were little, I learned the best verbiage to use with little kids. And what I would ask is, are you done with this? Are you done with this? And they would say, and it was sometimes very surprising things that I thought they still wanted to play with, or I thought were very important. They'd say, oh, Mom, I'm done with that. And I'd be like, oh, okay, we're done with the dollhouse. Okay, gosh, I thought we were going to have that dollhouse for 3 more years. But teaching them to recognize when you're done with something, and when you're done with it, it's time to let it go so someone else can enjoy it. That is a very powerful lesson.
I have a story there I want to share because it's the holiday season, and I think it brought tears to my eyes, and maybe we'll get a few tears out there in the audience. But when we were downsizing, we had inherited a stand-up piano, a big, heavy, stand-up piano that our kids used when they were little, but then they outgrew their piano lessons. And then we moved this thing with us from Chicago to Knoxville. And it was because it was stuff and we weren't using it even, but it came with us as part of the move. And it sat there for a few years. And then we had to get our lives together and downsize as empty nesters. And one of the things was to offload this piano because it was not going to fit in the new box. And so we were looking at, okay, what charity could we look at? Or you could try and sell it, right? Okay, maybe we want some money for it and trade this thing for cash, but there was no market for it. The market was inundated with pianos because people were using keyboards and things that gotten small and more compact. Nobody wanted a piano. Even the music school where volunteers teach other kids to play, they had more pianos that they could use. And we were at a loss and it was a couple of days before the move. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this thing? We can't move it into our driveway or our garage because I want to see it get good use. And a friend of ours had the idea, let me talk to the head of the school board and see what they have to say. And it turned out there was a school that had an arts and a choir program that had no piano. They had no piano. So they sent their movers by, picked up the piano, delivered it and they said, we'll take care of tuning it, delivered it to the school. And for Christmas, for this holiday season, the whole choir, the principal, the music teacher stood around the piano after it was tuned and sang, "We wish you a Merry Christmas," posted the video on YouTube, and that was one of the best Christmas gifts I've ever gotten.
That's beautiful, Bill. I love it.
Yes.
I love that story because it just shows how the things that we're holding on to that we no longer have use for can be very meaningful to other people. And that sometimes it's just about finding that right place where the person can use it. I had a piano too, and some things are really hard to declutter, and it's some of that kind of stuff. And I remember, because I had played the piano as a kid, and then I remember casually mentioning to my dad one time, yeah, maybe I would take the piano. And they lived in Michigan. He was at my door 3 days later with that piano. He'd gotten it on a truck. He's like, here you go. And so I had the piano in my house here. And I realized I wasn't really interested in playing it anymore. My kids were too little to play it. It was just a thing we set stuff on. And I thought, okay, I'm in this decluttering journey. How do I declutter the piano? I thought, what if one day one of my kids wants to play the piano? There was all of this, what if I need it someday? And so I posted it for free on Facebook Marketplace. And because I had not paid anything for it. So I was like, I'm just going to give it away for free. And I told myself, you know what? I'm just going to trust that if one of my kids wants to play the piano, that a free piano is going to come back into our lives someday. And until then, if my kids are musical, I'm going to push them toward guitars and saxophones and things that are portable. And as it would be, none of my kids were ever interested in the piano. They were actually never interested in really musical instruments. So I never had to worry about it. But I think sometimes there's almost this trust factor that if we let it go and let's say we would need it or we would want it someday, that the karma of the world will bring back to us through someone else's generosity something that we need in that moment. And I really believe that is true because that school probably was like, how are we going to get a piano? How are we going to find one? And your generosity allowed them to have what they needed. And I believe if you ever needed another piano, which I don't think you will, it would come back into your life too. So that's a really beautiful story, Bill. I love it.
Well, it's fun to share because the reusing of things. First, the not buying things is better for the world. We'll get macro green. We vote with our money. We buy stuff that causes producers to produce more, which goes into the landfills when we're done, as you say, with the stuff, unless we find creative ways of getting it to a place, as we've talked about, where somebody gets joy out of it. It's like paying joy forward. We had our joy. We were sparked by joy. This amount of time with this stuff. And as it flows through the world, it can bring joy in other ways to other people without just going from the shelves to the landfill.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things I've talked about before is we all know the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. We've learned those. What's interesting is we never really practice the first one. We love to talk about reuse and recycle, but we don't like to talk about reduce because that's the one that means we don't buy as much stuff. It's actually the most environmentally friendly thing we can do is reduce our consumption by not buying things we don't need. And it's the most environmentally friendly thing we can do. It's the most FI friendly thing we can do is not buy things we don't need. Because reusing and recycling, those require time, energy, effort, right? To reuse something or repurpose it, you have to think, okay, I got to get it to someone, or I've got to craft this thing into something else. Recycling takes energy, and often recycling is a very fraught endeavor. A lot of times we think they're getting recycled and they're not getting recycled. So if people out there are very environmentally conscious and that's a big motivator for you, realize like minimalism or simplicity is the most environmentally friendly thing you can do, because you're actually reducing, not ever entering the consumption stream, because the end of the consumption stream is the landfill for every single thing, right? No matter if you reuse it a bunch of times, you recycle it 1,000 times, at the end of the day, if the base material was not a compostable material, it's going in the landfill. That's the end of the line. And that process starts at the checkout. It starts at the checkout. And we have the decision as the purchaser, are we going to be the ones responsible, because we purchased it, are we the ones responsible for this thing eventually ending up in the landfill? And I don't say that to guilt anybody, because I have bought plenty of things, right? We all buy things. But I think we can all be more conscious about how much we buy, especially how much we buy brand new.
All right, Jackie, you have a story to tell. You checked out our sponsor, The Alloy Market, with a little gold bar that you sold them. How did that work out for you?
That's right, Bill. The short answer is it worked out great. I was really kind of surprised at how seamless the process was. I just ordered the kit online. They had it to me within days. I put the gold in the package, mailed it out, and almost instantly they notified me it was on the way. They told me when they received it, and they finally gave me a quote. And do you know how much I got for it?
No, Jackie, how much did you get?
Well, I got $285. And you know where that's going. That is going in my new grandbaby's 529 plan. And I was, again, very surprised at how seamless the process was.
All right, that's thealloymarket.com. You can declutter this season with your gold, silver, and platinum. Where do we go, Jackie?
Yeah, and here's a bonus. If what you send in is worth more than $199, you will get a $15 bonus. Just enter the code CUTOFI15 and get your bonus. I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about this inner clutter that you discuss in the Achievement Addict. I think me and Bill might be a little bit guilty of that, but can you talk through that a little bit and what you mean by the Achievement Addict?
Yeah, so Achievement Addict was my second book, and I wrote it after my first one. My first one's very much about physical clutter, decluttering, that kind of thing. And then what I realized as I went through this simplicity journey is that there are other ways that we clutter our lives that are not as visible and tangible as physical stuff. And I know for myself, and I think probably a lot of FI people who are goal-oriented types of folks are, maybe they can relate to this, which is there's a lot of this, I want to get to the next thing, right? Achieve the next thing, and then that will make me happy. And we achieve that next thing, whether it's a FI goal, whether it's a new job, whether it's a remodeled kitchen, whatever it is, we achieve the thing. And it's like a fleeting moment of happiness. And then we immediately find ourselves again wanting the next thing. I remodeled the kitchen, now let's remodel the bathroom. Or I got this job, let's get the next best job. Or I reached this FI goal, let me see if I can get to the next FI goal before I actually retire. It's this kind of never-ending thing where we're accumulating, but it's accumulating achievements. And I started thinking about it, how this was almost like an addiction. Because if you think of someone who's actually mired in a physical addiction to a drug or alcohol, it ramps up, because the amount of alcohol that will get you the buzz, if you continually drink, you're going to have to drink more and more to get that, right? Or same with using drugs or any other substance or shopping or whatever your addiction is. It's never like the same amount that will get you the high or the result. And I was like, this is how achievement can work as well. And so I started thinking about this, and I started talking to people who'd been through actual addiction, and I read books about it. And I'm like, man, it's the same process. And the difference is, of course, the big difference is our society applauds achievement. We are applauded for achieving things, and there's nothing wrong with achieving things, and it's good. But if we're basing our self-worth on that, that's when it can become very damaging for us as people. So there's nothing wrong with getting a promotion or remodeling your kitchen or achieving a FI goal. But if you believe that's what's going to make you a better person or make you like yourself, you are kidding yourself, because it's not designed to do that. And so I wrote this book as a mirror of my own journey. And I modeled it in like this 12-step process to model like a 12-step program of sorts of how I worked to declutter this addiction to achievement that or dismantle it or work through it that I definitely feel that I have had and still have. And the thing with this that's different than stuff is, and if you ever have known anyone who's gone through a real 12-step program, they'll talk about working the steps. You're never done with a 12-step program. There are days you wake up and you have to work step 3, you work step 4. It's like a template for how to live a life. And some days you're working different steps than other days. And I find that very much. Like I'll find myself, even the other day, I found myself trapped in a pattern of thinking that I needed to do this thing to feel good about myself. And I was like, oh, wow, look at that. Look at you going back to that old thought pattern. And I can't even honestly right now remember what it was, but I noticed it. I noticed myself getting into this thought of, oh, you have to do this so that you can be a good person. I'm like, no, you don't. You're a good person and you can do that thing. So anyway, that one is a deeper dive into emotional clutter. I actually find that to be a book that I like to reread myself, and I should reread it every year to remind myself of these things. But yeah, it's a different approach. And what I think is helpful is like the physical decluttering is the manifestation of that inward decluttering. The inner decluttering is harder because physical decluttering, like you bag it up in a donation bag, you take it to the Goodwill or charity and it's gone. But if you try to deal with some of your own feelings of insecurity or not enoughness, you can't bag that up and take it to the Goodwill and it's gone. You can deal with it in that moment and then it's going to show up again and you get to deal with it again. And so it's this continual practice of learning how do we deal with these difficult feelings that are part of being a human. And so that's what that second book is about.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like talking to Brad Klontz, who we did about money scripts. These are kind of dopamine scripts or consumption scripts because the construct that we have to kind of say, I need that latte because I need a treat, I need to feel better. And so I'm driven to consumption by my inner stuff where I'm not enough. And this is kind of a journey to get to that point where people have on their t-shirts, you are enough. You need all this externalization reassurance to assuage your anxiety, fears, all the negative emotions in your life. You can work from the inside out to say, you know what, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's very much the talk I did at Economy, which is why we were talking before we started recording. And I said that my talk at Economy is called The Journey to Enough. And I say that is the best speech I have ever given. I only ever gave it one time at the Economy conference. You can find it online. And that speech became a kind of a chapter of my book. That was like an early part of me working through this idea of enough and how I realized I've been trying to get to enough my whole life. And enough is a constantly moving target. There is no enough. It is a neverland. You don't ever arrive there. You choose to be there. You recognize that you already are there, that we all already are there. And that is a continual practice. So if people are interested in this kind of stuff, you could go check out that talk. It's 20 minutes and it really hits at all these different things we're talking about.
Because when in enough, you're talking about freedom. And when and where do you feel free? And we talked to George Kinder, and he kind of fooled me because he said, so are you free in the past, the present, or the future? And I said, well, I'm free from the past. I thought about it. And in the end, he says, you're free in this moment right now. This moment right now, you are enough. You can't be free in the past. You can't really be free in the future, meaning that phi will not set you free.
That is right.
You reach that pinnacle. I reached it recently, and it was like, whoopee, this is where I wanted to go, but it was big whoop. Yeah, I'm here, but I felt empty. It was kind of an empty feeling getting to the pinnacle of a 9-year journey or say finishing a marathon and, what's next?
Yeah, so your talk at Economy about enough was excellent. We will definitely drop it in the show notes. That is certainly worth watching. We'll also include the TEDx talk that you did, which I thought was great as well. So like Bill said, once we are free, once we've reached enough and this pinnacle, it does open other doors so that we can explore things maybe that we've always wanted to do, but all this other stuff kept us so busy. So I'd like maybe some tips on that, Rose. What are you doing now? And maybe we can finish out that way. Like what's going on now and Any tips for our listeners on what we've talked about today?
Yeah. So I guess, what's going on now, it's been interesting as you look at your life and you look at the whole journey by decluttering, by letting go. And then I did this internal work. And along the way, I did start pursuing financial independence and we've paid off a lot of things. So there's all these things in the past. And I think in retrospect, you can always see how all those little breadcrumbs led you to where you are. And so it's been interesting in my life now as I'm pursuing a completely different path than I would have ever thought I would be pursuing in my life. So I'm in politics. I ran for office in 2024 for state representative. I didn't win. And what's interesting is I didn't feel like a failure for not winning. And I think that would have been a different feeling. My race was not successful as a win, but I felt like it was a huge success because of that. I did it. Right? I did something that I had no experience doing, that I didn't know how to do, and I did it really well. And so it was a huge success. And I'm going to run again in 2026 for the same position. So I'm giving it a second try, but I'm feeling very positive about that here in Ohio and Dayton. And Jackie lives near me actually in Dayton. So she even came to some of my political events, which was so wonderful. So yes, I'm pursuing this thing that I never in my life was like, oh, I want to go into politics. It was never on my radar. But as things changed in my life and I became aware of different things, I'm like, I feel called to do this. And I have the space in my life to do it. That's the thing. Because I created physical space, I was able to create mental space, emotional space, financial space, because I own my own business. I don't have to work a 9 to 5. And to run a campaign is a full-time job. People do it with jobs. 9 to 5s, I don't know how they do it, but like running a campaign is a full-time job. I'm able to run a campaign really well because I don't have to work a 9 to 5. We've arranged our life in such a way that we can live on one income pretty well. So all of that has allowed me to pursue this thing that came into my life. And I think that is the freedom that can start with decluttering your towels, and it can start with decluttering your bathroom and decluttering the extra sweaters and whatever it is, because you're creating space. And when you create space to think, dream, imagine, and create, and that's where the magic happens. And really, that's the reason to pursue FI, is to create space so that you can do the things that you're called to do, that you want to do, that lights you up. And they're often very surprising. So that would be my advice is, if there are things in your life that you want to do, or you don't even know you want to do them, that's the other thing. I think sometimes when we've got all the clutter, whether it's physical, mental, whatever, financial, we actually don't have space to even see what we might have on the horizon. But when you create the space, you create space for those things to come in, and they've been hovering in the wings, just waiting, right? We've all got something hovering in the wings, just waiting, and we can't see it right now. Maybe physically you can't see it because you're looking at way too much stuff, or emotionally you're dealing with stuff. It's waiting for you, and you can start creating the space in your drawers, in your heart, and it will come in, and it's surprising and beautiful. And it's really, I think, what we're meant to do here in life is serve our communities and ourselves and make our life as spectacular as it can be.
I love that, because minimalism or simplicity is not restrictive. I love your concept of you're creating space for the possible, for the unknown. I was out on a walk yesterday and I hadn't walked in a few days, and you can sit down in a chair and say, I'm going to think about something to do or something to do with my life, and actively think about it. But your brain, when you get outside, get into the woods, listen to a podcast, maybe like Jackie and I do, all of a sudden you realize it's been working in the background. And all of these ideas flood into that empty space where you're not in your box, you're not surrounded by your stuff, you're surrounded by the expanse of nature. And for some reason, in taking that bath in the woods, all of a sudden you become really creative, and it brings you joy and exercise and mental space. I love how minimalism is almost a bad word, but creating space. Less is more. That was Mies van der Rohe. That was his style of architecture. Less is more often than not more. And like Charlie Munger says, always invert it. What is the opposite of more? It's less. That's going to be your more.
So, Bill, I have a couple of decluttering things that I have done, but I'm curious, what are you going to declutter now? Or have you done anything to move in this direction?
I think becoming FI decluttered my brain of money.
Yay. That's a great answer.
It decluttered my brain of thinking too much about money. Taking on a financial advisor decluttered my brain. I'm shedding the responsibility to somebody else. I want to have the space to focus on life. How do I spend my time versus how do I spend my money? Because at a certain point, because I'm still working and I haven't suddenly done something different, I'm trying to find the space to figure out what's next now that I've reached this ethereal FI goal, which seems to be a moving target anyway. And I call it the fog of FI. I'm trying to find the light at the end of the tunnel. So I have to give myself space to figure out what's next. But in the meantime, I'm still going to work, but I'm going to work with a little bit more spring in my step because I'm now going to choose to be there. And I'm looking at the opportunities that still working give me, because it gives me a lot. And one of the things I'm thinking about a lot right now is giving. I'm thinking about, now that I've decluttered and I don't have to worry about my own survival, thrival, and retirement, how can I give to others in intangible ways? And I'm creating a giving plan for our kids to help them grow wealth, and encouraging my parents to say, rather than give them $100 cash for their birthdays and Christmas, give them the gift of wealth and put it in their retirement account, or put it in their education account, put it in their taxable brokerage. Let them learn to play with that and watch it grow, because your gift of $100 is going to be thousands 40 years from now.
I love that, Bill. Now, as you're decluttering, if you come across those Apple Watches, well, there's two physical things that I have done. And since I retired, Rose, there's a lot to your point, Bill, there was a lot less that I was thinking about. Like, I used to have the spreadsheets and all of that stuff. And since I retired, I just I don't need to focus on my money as much. Or maybe I'll focus on niche things that I just get a spark that makes me want to do it. But so two physical things. About a few years ago, I got rid of all of my printers. So I don't have any new paper. Now, the issue is getting rid of the old paper that I have. I don't print statements. I don't print anything anymore because I do not have a physical printer. And then, Bill, I did my little project where I'm looking for valuable things. So I had this little mini bar of gold, and I sold it to Alloy. So I don't have to try to say, I'm going to have it for my grandkid. No, that grandkid is not going to care about it. And the reality is, it's probably going to get lost. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so those are a few of the things that I did. But from our conversation today, I'm going to start with my office because, Bill, I have plenty of stuff on my desk. And some of these things probably has been here for months unnecessary. So you have sparked a little energy in me to be able to do that. And my big takeaway, Rose, was one little piece at a time. So it may be this corner of my office that I'm looking at right now that I need to do. So you've helped us a ton. And I know that you've helped a lot of our listeners as well. And congrats on your new move into politics. I work the voting polls every year. That's what I feel like I was called to do. But God bless you. It's crazy right now. But I want to congratulate you because obviously you've created the space to be able to do that. And I think that's wonderful.
I mean, look, Jackie, look at what happened to you when you got FI. All of a sudden, you got your CFP. You became a financial educator.
That's true.
You're busier than ever.
Right. In a good way.
Decluttered your 9 to 5, which was inhibiting you from doing what you're doing now. And I kind of feel the same way. Like the what's next is going to fill up that space that I create in not working will be filled up with hopefully really cool, creative things that I never thought were possible for me. Look at Rose with politics, 3 16-year-olds at home. This is the power of FI. I think it is a less is more minimalistic creation of space and freedom and time. But we've got to do it along the way, as you said, because enough is always in the present moment. You are always free in the present moment. You've got to enjoy the journey. Your journey, Rose, has been fascinating. We could talk to you for hours, but then we'd be cluttering up people with more stuff.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap up the show. Rose, it's been a joy having you here. And to our late starters, always remember, it is never too late to start. It's better late than never. And it's always the right time to catch up to FI. We'll see you next time on Catching Up to FI.
Thanks, Rose. Thanks, Jackie.
Oh, thank you both.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. And our editor is Fritz Brazard. We love them and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofy.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to Fi. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to Fi. Cheers.